You ever look in the mirror and think, maybe love just isn't meant for you? Like, no matter how kind you are, no matter how much you give, the world only sees what it wants to see. That's what Martha Hale believed. All her life, she'd been told she was too big to be loved. Too soft. Too plain. Too much. So one morning, she packed her few things and left everything behind. The stares, the whispers, the pity. She headed west, to a place called Clearwater Ridge, Wyoming. A land of dust, wind, and wide-open skies. A place where nobody knew her name, and nobody cared what she looked like. She wasn't chasing love. She was chasing work. And when she got hired at Brackett Ranch as the new cook, she told herself it was enough. The ranch was known for its rough men, long hours, and its silent, towering owner, Silas Brackett. They called him the Giant of Clearwater. That first morning, Martha stepped into the old, dusty kitchen. The smell of burnt wood still lingered. The stove was cold. She rolled up her sleeves and whispered to herself, "I'm here to work, not to dream." But as the sun crept through the window, lighting the flour on her hands, the door suddenly opened behind her. The floorboards creaked. And when she turned around, the Giant of Clearwater walked in. And from that moment, something changed. They said no one could stand his silence. But I didn't mind silence. His name was Silas Brackett, the man everyone called the Giant of Clearwater. He was tall, strong, and quiet. The kind of man who didn't need to say much to make people listen. His eyes, they looked tired. Not from work, but from something deeper. Something like loss. That morning, he walked into the kitchen without a word. I froze for a second. He looked around, then at me. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. He tore a small piece, tasted it, and simply said, "Good." That's it. Just one word. But for me, it meant more than any compliment I'd ever heard. After years of feeling invisible, that single word felt like sunlight after a storm. Days started to blend together after that. Waking up before sunrise. Cooking for a dozen men. Cleaning, baking, working till my hands ached. And every now and then, I'd feel his presence near the doorway. He wouldn't say anything, just stand there quietly for a few seconds, then leave. But those few seconds, they stayed with me all day. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, that a man like him would never notice a woman like me. So I kept my head down and worked even harder. But the truth is, something inside me had started to change. A small warmth I couldn't ignore anymore. And then, he started noticing me too. You know what's funny? Love never shows up with fireworks. It doesn't knock loudly on your door. It just slowly sneaks in, like a quiet guest you didn't expect. Silas started noticing small things about me. The smell of cinnamon bread I baked every morning. The way I laughed with the workers when they joked around. How I always took care of anyone who got hurt, wrapping their wounds, feeding them soup, sitting by them till they felt better. He'd stop by the kitchen sometimes. Not to talk. Just to stand there, silent, leaning against the doorframe. He'd watch for a few seconds, then walk away like nothing happened. But I noticed. And every time, my heart would beat a little faster. Still, I kept reminding myself, don't be stupid, Martha. You're not the kind of woman men fall for. Not with these arms. Not with this body. Because when I went to town for supplies, I heard them again. The women at the store. Laughing. Whispering. The big cook from Brackett Ranch. Like my size was a joke everyone shared. But me. I smiled like it didn't bother me. But that night, I stared at my reflection and whispered, "Love isn't for women like me." And yet, deep down, something had already started to change. Something neither of us could stop. Because that stormy night, nothing stayed the same again. That night, the sky tore open. Thunder. Lightning. Wind howling like a beast. It felt like the whole world was shaking. I was in the kitchen, trying to keep the fire alive. The windows rattled. Rain poured like buckets from the heavens. And then, the door slammed open. Silas. He stood there, soaked and muddy, water dripping from his hair, his shirt clinging to him. He'd been out in the storm, trying to save the cattle before the river overflowed. He wiped his face with his sleeve and said, "The river's rising. We might lose the south pasture." He turned to go back out, but before he could, I stepped forward and said quietly, "Wait, you'll catch a cold like that." He stopped, just stared at me for a moment. I reached for a towel, handed it to him, and for a split second our hands touched. It was warm, soft, and suddenly everything went silent, the storm, the thunder, the world outside. Just me and him. He didn't say a word, just gave a small nod and went back out into the rain. That night, I didn't sleep. I could hear the wind screaming, the barn creaking. He was out there, fighting the storm alone. By morning, the rain finally stopped. The air was cold and still. When Silas came back inside, he was exhausted, his clothes torn and muddy. But he froze when he saw me, fast asleep by the fire, a pot of hot coffee still waiting beside me. I had stayed up all night, just in case he needed me. He didn't wake me. He just stood there quietly, watching. Something in his eyes had changed. Something soft. Something real. But peace doesn't last long on a ranch like that. And someone had already decided to destroy mine. It's not fists that break you. Sometimes it's laughter. That morning, Silas had gone out early with the men, checking fences after the storm. I stayed behind, cleaning up the kitchen. The smell of bread filled the air. The fire was warm. It almost felt peaceful. Until I heard him. Red Bill. One of the ranch hands, loud, sharp, cruel. He leaned against the doorway and said, "Hey, Martha, you ever wonder why no man wants to marry a woman who eats more than she can carry?" The others laughed. Not all of them meant it, but none of them stopped him either. I froze. My hands tightened around the bowl I was holding. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice just disappeared. So I turned away, pretending I didn't hear. But the laughter followed me, echoing through that empty kitchen like a cruel song. That night, I couldn't even look at Silas. He came in for dinner, same as always, quiet, tired, eyes soft from a long day. But I couldn't meet his gaze. I kept my head down, serving stew with shaking hands. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. He asked gently, "Something wrong?" I forced a smile. "No, sir. Everything's fine." My voice cracked a little, but he didn't push. He just nodded, though I could see the worry in his eyes. The pain sat heavy inside me all night. Those words kept replaying in my head like a broken record. And I told myself, maybe they were right. Maybe I was too much to love. But what I didn't know was that Silas had heard everything. Everyone has a breaking point. Even quiet men. The next morning, the ranch was alive again. Horses stomping, men shouting, boots crunching through the mud. Silas was out in the stables, checking on the animals, when he heard it. That same voice. That same laugh. Red Bill. He was telling the same cruel joke, the one about me. Mocking. Laughing. Like my pain was his entertainment. But this time, Silas heard every word. And something in him snapped. He walked over, calm at first. But his eyes, they weren't the same. He grabbed Red Bill by the collar and slammed him into the mud. The sound echoed across the yard. Everyone froze. Silas leaned close and said, in a low voice that shook the air, "Say that again, and you'll be finding work in another town." No one moved. No one spoke. Red Bill's face turned pale. Silas let him go and walked away, silent as ever. But that silence carried more power than any shout ever could. From that day on, no one ever mocked me again. Not a whisper. Not a joke. Nothing. I didn't hear about what happened until later. One of the ranch hands told me quietly, almost in awe. And for the first time in my life, I realized someone had finally stood up for me. Not out of pity, but out of respect. The next morning, Silas came to the kitchen early. He didn't say much, just asked, "Can you walk with me for a moment?" I wiped my hands on my apron, nervous, my heart racing. I didn't know what he wanted, But when Silas Brackett asked me to walk with him that morning, I never expected what he was about to say. Sometimes, the truth we've buried too long slips out when we least expect it. That morning, Silas asked me to walk with him. We left the kitchen, crossed the fields, and climbed up a small hill behind the ranch. There stood an old oak tree, tall, strong, and silent, just like him. He stopped there for a moment, looking down at the land. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "My wife's buried here." I didn't know what to say. He'd never spoken about her before. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the horizon. He told me how, after she died, he buried himself in work. How every morning felt the same. How the ranch kept him alive, but not really living. His voice was steady, but tired, like a man who'd carried too much for too long. I listened, quietly, respectfully, my heart aching for him. When he stopped talking, the silence felt heavy. The wind blew softly through the trees. And before I could stop myself, I spoke. "Sir, I'm not the kind of woman men fall in love with." My voice trembled. "I'm too fat for that. But I can cook. I can care. And that's all I know how to do." The words just came out, raw, honest, and painful. Years of being judged, laughed at, and overlooked, it all spilled out in one breath. I couldn't even look at him. I just stared at the ground, wishing I could take it back. But it was too late. And then Silas turned toward me. There was something in his eyes I had never seen before. Because what he said next shattered every wall I'd ever built around my heart. You know, love doesn't ask for perfect. It just asks for real. For a moment, Silas didn't say a word. He just looked at me, quiet, serious, and kind. Then in that deep, calm voice of his, he said, "Martha, you think love's about what a body looks like? You've kept this ranch alive. You've brought warmth where there was none. You've made me remember what it feels like to come home." I froze. No one had ever spoken to me like that before. Not once. I tried to answer, but my throat tightened. My eyes burned with tears. All I could do was stand there, staring at the ground, my heart beating so fast I could barely breathe. He didn't move closer. He didn't have to. Those words, they already broke through every wall I'd built around myself. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. His voice. His eyes. His kindness. So I did the one thing that always calmed me down. I baked one last loaf of bread. The smell filled the whole kitchen. Warm, soft, sweet, just like the feeling growing inside me. When Silas came in that evening, the firelight flickered across the room. He stopped in the doorway. And this time, I didn't hide behind my apron. I didn't look away. I stood there, hands covered in flour, heart racing, but smiling. And then he said the words I never thought I'd hear in my life. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive in roses. It arrives in bread and quiet smiles. Silas stepped closer. His hands were rough from work, warm from the fire. He looked straight into my eyes and said softly, "You're not too much of anything, Martha. You're exactly enough." For a second, I couldn't move. Those words, they didn't sound fancy or poetic, but they were everything I'd ever wanted to hear. After a lifetime of feeling too much, someone finally saw me as enough. A few months later, we got married. No big celebration. No fancy dresses. Just a small ceremony at the ranch, under that same old oak tree. The men smiled. The air felt lighter. Even the land seemed softer that day. Since then, laughter returned to Brackett Ranch. The kitchen was never cold again. The smell of fresh bread filled the mornings. And every evening, when the sun went down, Silas and I sat by the fire, quiet, content, together. The people in Clearwater started calling me the heart of Brackett Ranch. Not because I was the best cook, but because I finally learned something important. That love isn't about being perfect. It's about being real, being kind, being you. And as the years passed, I never once said I was too much again. Because I finally understood. I wasn't born just for labor. I was born for love. And somehow, Love found me anyway.